We're back with another episode of the Inspiring Women in CX podcast, a series usually dedicated to real talk conversations between women in customer experience and technology. This series, we're putting some of our awesome allies in the hot seat too, no longer rehashing the same old conversations. In Series 7, you can expect provocative discourse and plenty of healthy debate as we continue to challenge the status quo on CX topics. I'll be your host, Claire Muscat, and in today's episode, I'll be talking to one of our longest standing allies. Managing partner at the customer-led growth company The Foundation, he started his career 25 years ago on a market stall in Essex and has since worked with and in companies around the world to make things better for customers. Before joining the Foundation, he spent 12 years at HSBC, latterly as the head of customer innovation, and his first book on the topic, The Human Experience, was published by Bloomsbury in February 2023. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to today's incredible guest, John Sills. Hi, John.
Hey, Claire, you all right?
I'm great. Welcome to the Inspiring Women in CX podcast.
Thank you. I feel very privileged to be here. Very privileged.
The second of our allies to join us on the show. So we're super excited that you're here. And yeah, obviously we've known each other quite a while now. So I think maybe that'd be a good place to start. Just to tell the audience a little bit more about how we first met and your involvement in Women in CX so far.
Yeah, I think it's a very modern meeting, isn't it? So I think, you might correct me, I think we met maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I set up my Instagram account, which was CX Stories, which was all about trying to collect together, meant to be good, but mostly bad customer experience examples. And then I started following a few people on there that I could see were active in customer experience. And that was you. You were one of those people. And then I think we ended up doing the thing where you kind of like each other's posts and started chatting a bit about funny things that we saw, followed each other on LinkedIn. And then I think we started talking a bit about the book you were writing. And when we just started kind of sharing ideas from that point on. And I think it went from there. So I think it was I think actually we had a couple of years of that before we actually met in person. I remember that was in a bar in Soho. I remember we met there.
It was because the pandemic happened, didn't it?
Pandemic happened. That was it. So we didn't get to meet for quite a while because of that. So I think that's how we met. And then I've loved following what you've been doing with Women in CX and been really, really pleased that you've asked me to kind of be involved in the conference and you guys came over to the office, didn't you? Had a group of you come over to the office when you're working on the strategy. So it's been great to kind of see from afar and a bit closer what you've been doing and what you've been achieving.
Yeah, and you came and did a webinar in the community as well, didn't you?
I did a webinar about
two webinars.
The book.
Two webinars.
I was going to say, I think I've done 2, haven't I? Yeah, I think I've done 2. So everyone will be very maybe familiar with my face now. Lots of involvement.
Yeah, but still to this day, the funniest man in CX, as I introduced you to the stage at conference.
I'll take that. I'll have that on my grave. It's a lot of pressure, but I'll have that on my gravestone. To be honest, I do need to make sure I live up to the billing now.
I know I did set you up for that, didn't I, at the conference as well? You delivered, and everybody, remarked how actually genuinely hilarious you are and how human you make customer experience, which with that being the title of your book, it's probably
that's the challenge. Someone asked me the other day about the kind of leadership and like what your leadership quality was, and I've never really thought about that, or even if I'm a particularly good leader or not. But I do think kind of being authentic, when I was thinking about it, I was like, I think I'm pretty authentic. I think I'm kind of, you get what you see, and I'm a bloke that grew up in Essex, and I think that's kind of stayed with me. So I think you're right. When you write a book about being human, you do kind of need to be quite human, I think. And maybe that's partly why I spotted it, because you end up spotting things that you may be seeing yourself, you don't see in other people. But I love the conference. I thought it was fantastic to have so many people in the room together, all with kind of shared goals, but all people that, funnily enough, in some other parts of their life might be kind of competitors, if they're in consultancies or they're freelancers or they're just in other organizations that are competing. But the spirit of the day was so kind of positive and about kind of improvement and development for the people there, but also for the industry kind of as a whole. I thought it was excellent.
I know you and I have been sharing our own kind of like thoughts on customer experience events generally, haven't we? And reflecting on how rare it is really to go to one that is just about conversation and dialogue by subject matter experts and businesses, and leaders without the agenda of trying to sell anyone anything.
It's exactly, you know, when I was at HSBC, I used to get invited to conferences all the time to go and speak. And, you know, it made me feel really good. And like, you know, clearly people wanted to hear what I had to say. And then I left HSBC to become a consultant, and I realized people just wanted the brand, because all of a sudden I was like being asked to pay 15,000 to go to conferences. And it's a kind of an odd thing now. I'm like 10 years more experienced than when I left the bank. I've written the book and all these kind of things. I'm far more interested, I think, to listen to now than I was 10 years ago. But now I'm still kind of asked to pay a lot of the time to go. And it is exactly that. So many of the events just they're built around the sponsors, not around the delegates. It's a little bit like, I suppose, a kind of analog version of Facebook, you know, where, you know, you as the user, what you're really there for is to get the advertisers. Like the advertisers are the customers, they're the paying customers of Facebook. And as the user, you're the product. Like your data is the product. And I guess it's a similar thing with some of these conferences where, you know, if you go along to the conference and you might go through, you might pay. But if it's full of sponsors, you're the product that the sponsors are buying. Whereas what I loved about Wix, and we have one called the Foundation Festival we just started this year as well. You know, I think the purpose of those is much more genuine, and it is genuinely about trying to make the world better, trying to make the world more customer led, trying to help each other do better and with our own development without that you know, underlying kind of sales element to it.
Yeah, but I don't think many people realize, because I know when I was head of customer experience at Sainsbury's and I get asked to speak and invited to these kinds of events all the time, that I'd never really kind of seen that there was this like massive sponsor hall and they were booking meetings for me with like technology vendors and actually me on the bill as like a business side person gave the event credibility, and it's free to go and they put you up overnight. And I thought, oh, this is lovely. But actually, like, someone was paying a lot of money for me to be there, but they didn't pay me for my speech. But hey.
But it's very clever. It's a really clever business model, really. And I should say, you know, I'm not being too down on the conferences.
No.
We've started to speak at a few. You know, we've paid to speak at 3 or 4 in the last year, and actually they've been really good. Like, we've met really good people. I think there's actually a funny advantage for us that we can ignore the other sponsors. So we just get to talk to the delegates, and then actually, you know, you meet people that you know already. You know, you get to catch up with old clients, old colleagues, and you get to, you know, and they have been really good. But I also then don't get to go to many of the talks, and that's where I'm less sure if they're as impactful. But they're still, I think, interesting to go to.
Well, I owe you a favor. So if you need anyone to speak at the Foundation Fest, is that right?
That is good. Foundation Festival, but that was last year was our first one, so we're planning this year's one to see what we do. But yeah, I'll definitely keep you in mind.
Yeah, if you want me back. And now for a quick word from one of our sponsors. We are proud to be supported by Kantar, the world's leading evidence-based insight and consulting company. Kantar CX helps clients define customer and employee experience strategies, better understand their customers via measurement, and in turn improve business outcomes, driving true commercial ROI. To find out more about Kantar's CX practice, please visit the sponsor links on the homepage of womeninCX.community. Now back to the episode. Kind of drawing that together, we talked about kind of like conferences and stuff, but fundamentally, like, Women in CX was an organization designed to meet the needs of women in customer experience and technology. And we built this, I suppose, quite insular safe space where it was about women being there to support one another and champion one another. But the gendered nature of the community meant that we'd kind of it evolved this like amazing culture of like kind of sisterhood and sharing. And we hadn't really thought about men at all. So whilst we're not planning to open up our safe space to men, we also recognize the importance of, you know, women can't solve some of these challenges alone. Like, we need allyship, we need support, we need conversation around these issues, and we need to work together to solve them. It isn't something that like women can do entirely in isolation. So yeah, having like you and Ian at the conference and bringing male speakers into the webinars was a step forward for us. And yeah, you being on the podcast right now is I think, you know, an even bigger statement. So I just wondered what your thoughts are on the importance of allyship.
I think that's exactly well. Like I said, I was really kind of proud and privileged. It makes it sound like a LinkedIn post, doesn't it? Really? But kind of for you to very humbled to, but no, to like come along to the conference and be on the webinars. And I think I had a couple of conversations on the day with people about this actually, and I think it is really important because I think what you're doing is really, because clearly, I mean, it's funny you said you don't really thought about men. Well, I think part of the problem is a huge amount of men haven't really thought about women for centuries, millennia, and that's kind of partly why we're in the situation we're in, with things still being unbalanced and that need to kind of get to that proper equality. So I think it's absolutely right that there is that space and that area for women to get together, to share their thoughts, challenges, to have an opportunity to promote each other, to create opportunities for each other without some of that kind of artificial suppression that happens in big organizations, as well as kind of share kind of ways, support for ways around when you're trying to kind of deal with some of those issues that still exist. But having said that, certainly my view is what we're all striving for is equality. And that means, men and women being treated kind of in the same way, in a fair way, having fair opportunities, being able to help each other out and getting rid of a lot of the kind of biases that have been there in the past that have caused problems. And so for me, the kind of way to do that is, as you say, for men and women to work together in lots of ways to make that happen. And if we stay completely siloed, then that doesn't really get to the outcome either. It can probably help in different ways, but it doesn't really get to the outcome. So there is that need to, like that Venn diagram, to have those crossover points and have people that are being allies, hopefully both ways as well, to help men and women get to that point of equality. And I think it also really matters because I've learned a huge amount from watching you, understanding what you're doing with Wix, meeting lots of the other people in Wix about some of the challenges that you've had in business that I might have otherwise been blind to, because I just don't see it with my perspective and my background. So that's really important as well. I think it's important, I suppose, because sometimes I guess when you talk about an ally, it feels like, oh, I'm doing something really good for you by being an ally to you, but it's really not like that. It's about a relationship, and hopefully me being an ally to Wix and women in work in general is good. But actually the point is I'll probably learn even more, which can make me a better person, help to make the whole system work better as well. So I think that's why it's important to kind of keep having that balance and keep having those kind of cross-gender relationships, if you want to call it that, because I think that's ultimately what gets us to equality rather than complete silos in different areas. I think that's my view, but I don't know what you think.
All right, I like and respect your view, and you're entitled to your view. I was just thinking about that was allyship in itself. The fact that that you haven't experienced some of the challenges that women face, but you haven't immediately discounted them because you don't experience them. I think in amplifying the voices of women the way that we have, particularly through things like the podcast, we've been able to show the world from an intersectional point of view as well, not just from a gender perspective, but also race, sexuality, divergence from a neurodivergence or physical ability perspective, that just because you don't experience those challenges yourself, here's a view into what it's actually really like. So I think just we get a lot of questions around, why do women's communities need to exist? What's the point of women in CX? From men. But you from day one you recognize the need for it and supported that. I think also other examples, I think advocacy and sponsorship, being able to reach back into the community with those opportunities, because you've recruited quite a few freelancers from within Wix and given them opportunities for paid work, recognizing and spotting there's an opportunity to tap into an underrepresented sometimes group in the market, and to create that. And obviously that's great for you because you've got tapped into some amazing people. And I guess just that vocal sponsorship in a way, because listeners probably won't know, but like we'd never had a strategy until this year, and I didn't know how to do it because I'd never worked in like business strategy. And in talking to you about like, well, how do we even approach this? You like gave me a framework, you let me use your office, we brought the team in like for 2 days into the foundation, like all of those opportunities to access like that, I guess, yeah, sponsorship and support like we wouldn't have access to otherwise. I think it's those kinds of things maybe that men don't consider as allyship when it really is. And
yeah, I think that's right. And it's really, it's really, yeah, it was really good to hear. I suppose. I mean, and I think even that there's two really interesting things there. One is I think it's interesting people that work in our kind of work, and I guess in my background in customer experience all the way through my career, a big part of that is about, can you put yourself in other people's shoes?
yeah.
Like, can you understand that you don't understand? It's getting away from that curse of knowledge. I've never been a fan of that phrase of treat people how you want to be treated, because I think that's the opposite. You want to treat people how they want to be treated, and so I think that ability to kind of recognize you won't understand someone else's perspective, and as you say, listen to it but not discount it, I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, it's incredible how many people just discount other people's experiences because they've not lived it themselves. And you think, well, there's 10 billion people on the planet. Like, you can't surely you can't believe that you, a 54-year-old man living in Solihull, has had these same experiences everybody else in the planet. It just, but people do, don't they? And yeah, so I think that probably comes hopefully with the territory of working in the world that we do, that level of understanding is there. But I also think that some of what you said is kind of just about generally a spirit of generosity.
Yeah. Good human.
A human, just being a nice human, and I'm really pleased we were able to, for you to come in and use the offices and spirit. I'd also like to think that if I knew, a group of men that wanted to do that I'd still be as generous, I guess, and bring them in. But I think it's I think it's just making it really clear that the offer's there and you can come in. And I think it's that kind of, being able to have worked with you over the past few years in that way, knowing what you're trying to achieve. I think that makes it, I'm being really impressed by that, makes it, I think, probably more likely for me to go, oh, come on, Claire, come and use our place, and that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah. And for anyone who's actually watching the podcast on YouTube, like, John has actually stood in the room where we did our workshop and came up with which strategy for 2024 and beyond.
Covered in post-its. Yeah.
You couldn't see through the walls there, could you? Because literally we'd covered that every surface that was possible to have post-it notes on, had post-it notes on, which is what those spaces are for. So I'm gonna ask you a bit of a provocative question, based on the conversation we've had thus far, and it is actually about customer experience. So what are your thoughts on the eligibility of like empathy and customer experience? Having said what you've just said, like, what would you say on that matter? How possible is it to be genuinely empathetic when you don't have lived experience?
I think it's a brilliant question. I think you can, because I think you can still be human. You can still recognize emotions. I was very lucky when I worked at HSBC. I got to work across 20 different countries when I was in global customer experience. So I got to work across 20 different countries. And that allows you to see what's true in every market, for every customer, in customer experience, and what's different. And I think that helps you start to get a feeling for what are those kind of almost core human traits that are kind of there for everybody. So, for example, the need to feel certainty. For most people in any walk of life, you want to feel certainty, because a lack of certainty makes you feel a bit worried or concerned. Now, there's some people that have different tolerances of that, where that kicks in at different levels. And there's some people that deliberately choose to find uncertainty because they find it thrilling. So, for example, if you love big roller coasters or you love base jumping, that's kind of what you're doing, But most people react. So I think you can do that. What I think is much harder to do is for someone to tell you their experience and for you to say, I know how that feels. And I generally would suggest that's not actually a good way of giving a good customer experience. I think it's much better to, okay, well, tell me how that feels. Tell me how it feels. Because even if say it was my best friend who's same age, grew up in the same place, we even called the same name, I might think that I really know how that feels. But you can never really know what it's like for someone because there's so much going on in people's heads, people's backgrounds. You just cannot think in that moment. Someone once gave me a good example of, they said you should never finish someone's sentences. If someone's like struggling for a word and you just helpfully go, oh, whatever, chocolate, or you fill in a sentence. They go, because that presents a huge arrogance on your part that you know what they were going to say. And I really like that. It's just as a principle, actually, because you're right. It's so much more powerful to ask questions. Tell me how that feels. You can reference about the emotions. I can see you're feeling upset about that. I see you're angry about that. But I think that need to kind of ask, get people to explain it themselves. That's so much more powerful. And then you can empathize with the feelings of the situation with certainty because of what they've told you, as opposed to trying to almost make it about yourself and go, yeah, I've been through that. And that's, I think, really unhelpful because, I'm sorry, I'm rambling slightly, but just, it's a bit like if you've had someone close to you pass away and someone else says, oh yeah, I had that last year or something. It kind of helps, but it kind of doesn't, because it's not a competition. It's not like, were you sadder than me or did this affect you? It's like, I've just got to sit with my own feelings and I just kind of need someone to listen about how I'm feeling. So that's probably how I'd look at it, I think, is the best way of dealing with it, whether you have been in the same situation or not.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So empathy being more about listening and understanding to someone's lived experience and being able to empathize with the emotion that they felt rather than the situation or how it affected them, and ultimately compassion and humanity being the road to doing that. I think it's really important as well, because so much of CX these days is not based on listening. It's based on telling. It's based on frameworks and trying to push an agenda, or I hate the word evangelizing customer experience, rather than just really listening to the humans in the business, whether that be the business stakeholders. The voice of the business is just as important as the voice of the customer, as is the voice of the employee. And I think whether you're inside on the business side or you're as a consultant, 90% of your engagement should just be asking questions. I can find a helpful point of view.
Completely agree. Someone once said to me at one of the training courses I went on years ago, which is, you can always measure how good you are as a listener, really, that the other person should always be speaking 80% of the time. And that should be your aim in any meeting, in any conversation, that the other person speaks 80% of the time. And if you've not done that, then you're not listening. You're not listening well enough. And so I think that's exactly right. Just that ability to listen, ability to kind of sit with people, and the kind of ability to understand. And the biggest challenge I think the CX industry has got is the fact that it's become an industry. And so, to your point about the way CX is at the moment, it shouldn't exist. It just shouldn't exist. You shouldn't have to constantly remind businesses that their customers matter. It's kind of matters. And the problem that it's become an industry means you obviously get lots of big organizations wanting to sell stuff like measurement frameworks and measurement systems, and they sell stuff. And so those things go into the organizations, and then that becomes the way CX works. And it's really not how CX should work. So that's the kind of slightly difficult challenge, kind of like an Inception-like challenge for the CX industry, is that its existence is the problem, actually.
Love that Inception challenge. CX within CX within CX within an organization. But I agree, and I think CX technology set to become a $38 billion industry next year, just CX technology, and there's finite amount of resources and cash to fund activity that benefits customers. And what a lot of companies end up investing in is something that the customer will not directly benefit from. at all. Like, you know, having data and insight and feedback is important, but like there's so many other things you could do with a couple of million quid that would directly impact customers, and, you know, be noticeably felt in their experience and have a knock-on impact on the business outcomes. Conversely, like investing in systems that make employees' jobs easier to do so they can deliver better service. I know when I was in business and when I advise businesses, like I think that's one of the later things in maturity I'd say is required, not one of the first things, but it ends up being the first thing, as you said, and everything gets built around the survey or the feedback tool or the metrics are what we're trying to alter rather than the quality of the experience or like the human aspect. So I was going to ask you what you thought of the current state of CX, but you've told me.
I mean, I suppose just throughout, I think there's just two different questions there. So I think there's the current state of customer experience, as in the experience that customers are getting, and that is not in a good place. Like, you know, the number of problems are flying through the roof. Satisfaction hasn't moved. Organisations are taking a lack of ownership. There's a real kind of parent-child problem between organisations and customers. Both actually are to blame in a slightly odd way. You know, a lot of the kind of way we deal with social media has kind of started coming out in organisations. A lot of the generation that came through the financial crash and were taught to kind of hate companies and hate banks and hate capitalism, are now coming into leadership positions, and that's causing real problems, I think, in the way organisations are working. So the real problem with customer experience, kind of flicking what I said on its head, the actual customer experience industry, I think, is thriving. I don't think it should exist, but I think it's thriving in that it's never been bigger, it's never been busier, it's got a whole load of money coming into it. Whether that's helping improve the customer experience, I don't think it is, and I think the stats prove that. And, you know, you could take any part of that 38 billion and turn it into better training for frontline teams and probably a few more people in the contact center, and you'd instantly increase the actual experience for customers kind of overnight, really. So there's kind of two different answers to that question, depending which angle you're looking at it from, I think.
Yeah, no, that's super clear, and I agree with you. Sorry to interrupt your listening, but I just wanted to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about Wix. We're the world's first online membership community for women in customer experience. Our mission is clear, and that's to unleash the power of women to lead the future of human-centred business. Working in CX can feel lonely at times. We're often single-handedly trying to change the way organisations think and behave about customers. On our paid platform, you can discover a vibrant tribe of fellow female professionals, find support from knowledgeable peers, learn best practices from experts and practitioners, and be inspired to up your game through leading-edge CX and EX thinking. If you feel like you aren't making enough progress with your CX objectives, are unsure about what your next move looks like, or are struggling to achieve your career ambitions, you're not alone. To learn more about membership, see how women are progressing personally and professionally with the support of the #1 community in CX, you can apply to join us today by visiting www.womenincx.community/membership. I really hope I get to see you there soon. So, bearing in mind the current state, where do you think we're heading?
As the industry or as customers?
I think given that you'd like split it out so succinctly into customer experience being something customers experience and customer experience, let's say management or industry. Let's do it both ways.
Yeah. Well, I think the industry is easy to answer because that's inevitably going AI. You know, so I was at a conference last week and every other stand around had AI written on it somewhere. I'm not sure they all knew what that meant, but it was on there somewhere, you know. And so I think you can already see there's some really cool stuff coming out from like Zendesk and the like. You can see this kind of, we've had this really difficult period of chatbots that are just, you know, they're just awful. They're just like escape room gatekeepers that get in the way. They've been awful while, you know, companies have spent a whole load of money putting them in and cut down on the people, and it's just been a bit of a disaster. So I think you can see that we're probably heading towards a better future, because when you start to get kind of more AI, generative AI coming into kind of those chatbots, they're going to be way better. They're going to be way better. So that is definitely going to improve. And it should really help people in the contact centers. There's some great studies been done recently that show that for new people a new person in the contact center using AI to support them, their kind of quality of reply is like 40% better. Interestingly, for experienced people in the contact center, it made no difference. So there's a point where the AI stops being any better than a really good person. But there is a big chunk of people that are new and that are going to improve. And that matters because, as you know, in contact centers, the turnover is so high. So that's I think, really positive for where that's going. But that's where the industry is going to go with its money. Hopefully it will stop putting so much into feedback surveys, but I suspect not. So I think that's still there. Overall, I'm kind of still on the fence. I'm not overly optimistic, I don't think, about where the world is going. And I have to be really careful saying the world, because it is really different in different markets. A friend of mine from South Africa came to visit the UK recently and was really shocked by the standards of customer experience in the UK. And she said, actually, in South Africa, it's still really high. And her view was because all the organizations are still really trying. They haven't kind of reached this point of scale where they just feel so secure that they have to stop trying. So she felt like all the organizations in South Africa still really tried to want your business. Whereas I think if I talk from the UK perspective, and I think from the US, I think it's really hard to see how you're kind of going to get out, how we're going to get out of this lull that we're in, and this kind of disparity between organizations and between customers. Even the disruptive startups, the likes of, if you look at Uber Eats and Just Eats and Deliveroo, they've got awful customer experience, really bad customer experience, but they're cheap. Or they claim to be cheap, so people don't kind of mind as much. So I'm less optimistic. I think that in the next 5 years we're going to see a dramatic improvement in customer experience. People like Octopus Energy do give me hope, because they're a fantastic organization. I write about them in the book. There you go, you got Octopus. And they're making big waves in a big, difficult industry, and I hope that might become a bit of a standard bearer. So I'm really willing them on as they get bigger to keep hold of their kind of customer experience standards and the way they are as an organization.
You heard it here first. And for anyone who's listening, just listening to the podcast rather than watching it, held up a little octopus. I am an Octopus Energy customer, and definitely I'm feeling the benefit of their acquisition, because I was a Bulb customer previously, and it's night and day customer experience. It really is very impressive business. So I just wanted to pick up on one of the things that you said there. So in the future, like, the technology will go more into technology like artificial intelligence that aids contact center agents to do a better job for customers. There was one thing was that perspective on spending less on what at the moment is like massive surveys, right? So, or massive investment in surveys. And I just remember at the conference you talked about like the fat end of the wedge and the thin end of the wedge. I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about that to listeners.
Yeah. It's my favorite thing to talk about, actually. Yeah. So if you imagine your customer's life as this kind of wedge shape, and at one end of the thick end of the wedge, you've got all the things that really matter to them. You've got their hopes, dreams, ambitions, friends, family, work, the things they're trying to achieve. Then you've got the things that get in the way and the challenges they have, the services they use to help. And then right at the very thin end of the wedge is you and your organization, any organization, a very tiny part in the customer's overall consciousness, in their overall life, the things they're trying to achieve. And the problem is we've never had more customer data than we have now coming into organizations. But 99% of all of that customer data is at the thin end of the wedge. What do you think about us? What do you think about our service? What do you think about our product? Would you recommend us? It's really, really inside out. And that's dangerous because it convinces leaders that they're close to what matters to customers, whereas in truth, they're only really close to customers' opinions of their business. It's a very subtle but a very significant difference as to whether organizations and leaders in organizations really understand what matters to their customers. And that matters because the most trailblazing organizations, well, they start from the thick end of the wedge. They understand what matters to customers, understand their role in their lives, work out how they can be most useful to them there, not just repeatedly ask you, are you happy with the service that we get at the moment, which makes you feel like you're understanding people, but you're really not.
Is that a vote for research over feedback?
It's well, it is in the loosest term. I would kind of describe it, we call it here at the foundation immersion, customer immersion, because I think what you need is, if you go into any organization, and you'll know this, Claire, that if you get kind of any kind of customer data and it's presented on PowerPoint and PDF, if there's things on there that people don't like, they'd rather question the methodology than accept the inconvenient truth. They'll kind of go, well, it's not the right sample, or well, we didn't really ask enough people. Oh, it was raining that weekend, you asked people. It doesn't really count. Whereas if you get people face to face, this is what a big part of what we do at the foundation is, get senior leaders to go shopping with customers, to go to customers' houses with their permission, to do video diaries with customers, real kind of immersion into customers' lives. You still might not like what you hear, but you can't deny it's true. You cannot deny it's true. It's a lived experience of that person, and that's what gives you that emotional, visceral connection to what really matters to people. That gives you the conviction to then get into action. That's what you need. That's really what you need if you're going to be able to see big change in organizations. So the surveys are fine as long as people understand the role that they play. And it is important to understand how your transactions are working, albeit you can get most of that from the data you've got already, but that matters. But if you really want to understand customers, you've got to get out there with them. You've got to go into their world. You can't just ring them up every time they've complained and saying that that's a customer closeness program, because it's not.
And obviously that is super clear how you do that in a consumer environment. But what about in B2B? What's customer immersion for B2B look like?
It's exactly the same. And it's funny, I get asked that question, I think, every week, because we work about 30% of our work is with B2B. And ultimately, businesses are still run by humans, like it's still people, in there. And of course, different sizes of businesses, it makes it a little bit different. But, if one of your customers is a 500-person business, well, you still want to go out and meet the CEO or the CFO. You can still go and spend a day in the factory or the warehouse or their contact center or their head office. You can still spend time with the business. You can use their products. You can be a customer of that business. If you're talking massive, if you're starting to talk kind of Tesco size, again, it's slightly trickier, but you can still go and spend time with whoever your relationship is with in there. You can still spend time in their office. You can still go and be a customer. It's still about human to human connection. You just need to understand who are the people that we need to understand and where are they, and let's go and spend time with them, whether that's in a conference hall or whether that's in a front room.
Yeah, I suppose that also translates to employee experience as well, doesn't it? Like being able to really get immersed into the reality of what it's like to work for your organization when you're sitting at that top table quite far removed from operational realities.
It's exactly right.
So what do you think the main barriers so I'll start that question again. What do you think the main barriers or challenges that we need to focus on right now are in order to get to a better future?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say this, given the book that came out, which we say, it's human experience. I've got this far into the podcast. I've not said the title of my own book. It came out a while ago now. I would say this. I think it is that humanity, and actually, to make that clear, I think it's about common sense and straightforwardness. If I were to take it all the way down, if I was to get organisations to do one thing right now, I'd be looking at language, straightforward language. I'd look at the way you talk to each other as colleagues. I'd look at the way you talk to your customers. There's this incredible thing that happens in organisations where we all, we're all humans. And we all speak in a normal human way. And then we go into the office or we open up our laptop and we just start typing in a funny way. We start saying kind regards and best wishes and, as per my previous email, and all these kind of phrases that we use. I hope this email finds you well. That's my pet hate. Like what does that even, how can an email find you well? Like, what does it even mean? I don't, but everyone writes it. I hope this email finds you well. Why do we do it? So anyway, I'm getting quite het up about this. But we do the same. When you look at organizations, how they write to customers, they just write in this language that people just don't use, like real people don't use. Now it comes from this thing called the curse of knowledge, which you'll know, a behavioral science bias, which is once you know something, it's really hard to remember what it's like to not know it. It's just really difficult. So when you've been in an organization for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, when you start to look at places like financial services, 20 years, it's just really hard to know that some people just have no idea what an overdraft is. And so you write these letters that you think are clear and straightforward, and they're really not. So that would be my number one thing, actually. If you just want to start with something, get much clearer, much more human and straightforward on your communications, written, spoken, to each other and with customers. And that will go quite a long way to just reducing customer frustration before you can even start to do some of the other things.
I agree. Yeah. And sometimes the temptation is to go to like big, shiny, technology oriented solutions that require a lot of investment, a lot of time, and a lot of risk, when actually there are some super simple human things that could be done better and have a compound effect of probably a similar level of impact, or maybe not. So oh yes, I was gonna say, so as you know, because you were at the conference, Women in CX is becoming the movement for human-centered business. What kinds of things would you expect to see from us going forward?
As Women in CX, do you think?
Well, yeah, Women in CX, the movement for human business.
Yeah. I think there needs to be. I think, go back to the point of earlier. I think there's a lot about authenticity that still gets missed out. So I think it's very easy maybe to focus on humanity and customer experience and what that looks like. But actually, when you're talking about human-centered business, so much of customer experience comes from how people act with each other within business. Showing each other respect, being very authentic people, speaking in an open language, being empathetic to each other. I think if you do that with each other as colleagues, you will naturally probably do that far more with your customers. So I would expect, and I would think that you may end up kind of having a lot more focus and conversations on those areas, which then lead to a much better customer experience. Because really, human-centered businesses, I think, just have human behaviors. Yeah, all of the people. And I in the book, I kind of quite cat-handedly try and compare it to like just having a real relationship. So think of all the things that create a really good relationship with a partner, and actually they're the kind of things you just want. You wouldn't be with someone who's every time you message them, they message you from like a do not reply message thing. Like they could message you, you could message them. You wouldn't be with them if when you rang them up you couldn't get through for like 3 hours. And they sound like quite silly examples, but it kind of matters really, because we're paying people to be their customers. So I think we can think about that in terms of how we treat colleagues, and that's how you create that human-centered business, I think.
Love it. So final thoughts from you, John, based on our conversation today. What would one final piece of advice or takeaway be for our audience?
Well, can I do two? Because my first one would obviously be my first one would be human. Because I have to say that, because that's my trademark now, I think. So
with the Hoover, with the Henry Hoover.
Yeah.
It's working.
Exactly.
It's salient.
It's there, isn't it? So absolutely be human. I think the second one would be like, be yourself. I think this authenticity thing is so important, and I think that's true for everybody, men, women, everybody. To the more we can be authentic to ourselves in business and in life, but in business, I think the better the business becomes, and the more you understand each other. And so much in life and in business, the problem is us trying to pretend to be other people because we think we should be, because that's what expected. And that causes all kinds of trouble. So I think the more authentic you can be, appreciating is easier in some situations than others, and easier for some people than others. But the more you can do that, or you can help build a business that allows that, I think the better the world becomes.
Love it. And I think I probably add a third, which is remember that 80-20 rule of listening, more talking.
Yeah, definitely that.
So thank you so much, John.
Pleasure. Really pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation.
No, thank you. And thank you for the previous 5 years of friendship, support and allyship. And just being an all-round awesome human that, as I will ultimately always say whenever I speak to you, John, the funniest man in CX. So thank you for being here.
I'll take that. Thank you. Thanks, Claire.
And thank you to everybody who listened or watched along wherever you are. We'll see you all next time. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Inspiring Women in CX podcast with me, Claire Muscat. If you enjoyed the episode and you don't already, please do drop us a like and subscribe to our channel. The bigger the following, the bigger the impact we can create on our mission to amplify the voices of women working in CX and technology. Well, that's all for now. See you next time.